For almost all his life, Teresa was he type of woman that no one noticed, but all, they needed it. In the block they called her Doña Teresa, although few they knew his surname. At home, she was simply Mom. She cooked with care and kept the house clean like a hospital and never raised his voice. He learned to solve the problems without bothering anyone, to surrender his pension-deceased husband, and to bear it with a smile the snubs from their children adults. She lived alone in the same house where saw grow up Mariana and Esteban, an old house with high ceilings and a patio with jasmines, where each corner had a history. His routine, although solitary, gave him meaning. I watered the plants at 6, I prepared his breakfast with bread from the day before, and I saw novels with low volume so as not to disturb the neighbors. The fall happened to evening anyone on the way to the bathroom. Nothing serious, just a silly slip, but enough to alarm his children. Or so. It seemed like Mariana arrived the next day with a Tupperware of soup and many questions disguised as concern. Esteban brought papers and a folder. They spoke to him in a sweet tone, almost childish, like if suddenly she had stopped being an adult. They said they wanted to get things sorted so she wouldn't have to worry for nothing. Between hugs and smiles, they put forehead to she a pile of documents. Just sign, Mom. It's for everything this further easy. Teresa felt a stitch in his chest. Something didn't fit. There was signed thousands of things in his life without looking, for confidence or tiredness. But that night, with the fingers still marked by the blow, she waited for everyone to leave and, alone in his bed, turned on the lamp. The roll crunched under his fingers while I read word by word. At first, everything it seemed routine. Powers, notary, procedures, banking, authorizations to sign in his name in case of emergency. But as it progressed, the wording became further technique, more colder, more distant, and there was a clause hidden between paragraphs, legal documents that stated that by signing, Teresa gave in full rights about your house, your pension and his car to Esteban and Mariana. It was not a temporary help, it was a transfer definitive, a dispossession disguised as protection. His heart was beating strong. His body recognized a betrayal long before his mind will assimilate it by complete. He closed the folder with trembling hands, stood up slowly, and walked toward a desk where still he kept a pen with ink blue. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. He just wrote a phrase, simple, direct, in letter clear and firm. Any decision regard to this property must have my approval written. He slipped it between the papers, in the free space of the document, and signed below. If you ever felt like something didn't fit but you didn't know as act, maybe this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that matter. In the morning next, when Stephen came to pick up the papers to take to the notary, Teresa already had ready. "Here, it's here, son," he said, with a smile that revealed nothing. He took it without checking and left happy. For weeks, there was no talk more on the subject. Mariana returned to her routine. Esteban stopped appearing so much. Teresa continued with her life, his plants, his coffee with stale bread, his novels. But for inside, there was something changed. It wasn't anger, neither revenge, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I felt that I had acted with conviction, not just to avoid a problem, but to defend something that was his. And although nobody knew still, that little one act of resistance silent was about to mark a before and after in his life, and that of his family. The day Mariana and Esteban decided put the house in rent, they arrived together, with one smile tense and the excuse rehearsed. "Mom, we thought it best I would be moved into an apartment smaller, with an elevator close to us," Mariana said, caressing him. Esteban, already there, was brought to a corridor, real estate that was waiting outside in the car. Teresa, them. He listened without interrupting. When they finished, he calmly stood up and walked over to his drawer, comfortable, and took out a cardboard folder. He opened it on the table. He searched the document. And with the same serenity with which he served coffee, he pointed out the clause, added, Please read here, clause C. Silence was immediately. Stephen took he paper, he frowned, and Mariana paled. What is this, Mum? She asked, not hiding her discomfort. Something I wrote before signing. You can't do anything with this house without my consent by written. The atmosphere became dense, like Here would have been arrested. What followed was not a conversation, but a clash of realities. Esteban tried talking about legalities, Mariana about feelings, but Teresa did not move from her place. I didn't sign by fear, nor to complicate their lives. I signed so as not to disappear, he said in a voice firm. Esteban, irritated, announced that he would speak to a lawyer. Mariana accused her of being distrustful, ungrateful, but Teresa didn't respond to the attack. She was hurt, yes, deeply, wounded, but also calm. There was discovered that blind love could also be coming against him, and that protecting himself was not selfish. That night, instead of crying, he wrote in his black-covered notebook, Today, I listened to myself same. Today, I signed and also spoke. Saved a notebook next to an old letter from Julian, his husband, like Yair knew that day was to be remembered. In the following days, Teresa avoided the calls. Mariana persisted with long messages, full of complaints, veiled and promises confusing. Stephen sent a lawyer to the house who, upon reading the clause written in his own hand, confirmed his validity. It's unusual, but it's legal, he said. They left without saying goodbye. That same late, Teresa sat down in the neighborhood square, where each Fridays they met some neighbors, older people, to knit and talk about grandchildren. For the first time, decided share what there was lived. At first, there was silence, uncomfortable. But then they began to emerge other voices. A woman. He confessed that his daughter had him emptied the account bank with an authorization that she didn't understand. Another, who lived in a part rented because there was loaned his house so as not to cause problems. Teresa gave account then that she was not alone, and that her history was not an exception, but part of a pattern further big. From that day on, every Friday became in something more than a meeting of friends. They started to wear papers, doubts, contracts. A neighbor, he took a copy of your testament. Another, the receipts from your pension. Teresa, with her notebook in hand, he listened and took notes. He discovered that his little act, that line handwritten, could inspire to others not to sign in automatic, to ask, to say no. Unwittingly, he became an example, not a formal leader, but a reference. Women, they began to call him the Section C, as a symbolic way to recover voice and space. For Teresa, it was more than that. It was proof that a woman, even after raising, loving and giving in, still could draw a line that was not against his children, but in favor of himself. Same. Do you know someone who needs hear this? Share this story with her. And please subscribe to the channel so that this message I arrived even further. The break deeper came one Sunday when Mariana appeared unannounced. She had the serious face, the smudged makeup, and a file in her hand. Teresa opened the door for her without saying a word. Mariana entered as Yair still had the right to that house, but his step was no longer the same. They sat down, face to face, at the dining room table where yesteryear they knitted together. Mariana left the papers on the table. Mum, what did you do? Us complicated a lot. We had already. Esteban already there was spoken to an interested family. Why didn't you trust me? Teresa didn't raise her voice. She just looked her in the eyes and said, because they didn't ask. They decided by my it won't count anymore. Mariana looked down. We wanted help you, he murmured, but neither she same it seemed convinced. The conversation. It didn't last long. Mariana left with the papers intact. Teresa was certain that, although it hurt, there was done the right thing. A few days later, he received a visit unexpected. Camilla, her 17-year-old granddaughter, years old, arrived alone with a school notebook in her backpack. "Grandma, can I make you an interview for a school job?" she asked. Teresa was surprised, but nodded. Camilla pulled out a sheet where had noted questions about women who had faced situations difficult. "The teacher said we could choose to someone in the family," explained Teresa, who all her life there was, believed that his existence did not deserve biographies. He began to tell. He spoke of the fall, of the papers, of the claws, of the silence. Camilla listened to her with the attention that was not hidden admiration. "And how you knew that, right?" she asked. Teresa shrugged. "I didn't know. I just felt it." When they finished, Camilla gave her a long, different hug, as if her grandmother were suddenly someone else, someone strong, brave, someone who had something important to teach. From that day on, Camilla began to visit Teresa more often. Frequency, sometimes with tasks, school children, others just to chat. I asked him to tell me stories of Grandpa Julian from when Mariana was a child, from the times where everything was done by hand. But what interested him most was the black-covered notebook. "Can I read it?" he asked. Elate, Teresa hesitated, but agreed. Camilla read it as if it were a diary secret full of wisdom. He found phrases like, "Today I watered my jasmines with tears, but flourished the same," or "Keeping quiet is easy until you learn to tell yourself the truth." He started copying some phrases in his own notebook, decorating them with flowers and ribbons. Teresa watched in silence with a mixture of pride and modesty. Never. He thought that his way of resisting could turn in seed for another generation. One afternoon, Camilla brought a pot with damp soil and a jasmine sprout. "We plant it together, shall we?" Teresa knelt down with her in the patio. Both of them, with their hands in the dirt, laughed as they got muddy. "The fingers, do you know by that jasmine?" Camilla asked. "Because you say, it is the flower that smells when nobody sees her." Teresa smiled, and for first time in a lot time, he felt that love didn't hurt. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "Today, we planted, and I'm not just talking about plants." In the following days, Teresa began to change small things in his routine. He started painting again his kitchen with light colors, took out the curtains old. It was noted in a course free for adults, older people in his center community. He didn't do it to prove anything. He did it because something in its interior had been awakened. Because, perhaps by first time, your life it was no longer spinning in around the others, but to himself same. The reunion with Esteban was more tense. They passed weeks without speaking, until one day he appeared at the door with a box in hand. "I brought your documents. The originals," he said, avoiding his look. Teresa invited him in. Esteban sat down stiffly, as if I did not recognize he. Armchair where sometimes slept sick with fever, childish. "Mum, I swear it wasn't my intention make you damage," he said, finally. She nodded, not interrupting him. "I just thought it would be further easy for everyone. Yes, things were at our side name." Teresa took air and replied, "Easy for you, but I'm alive, Esteban. Still, I have the right to decide." He lowered his head, ashamed. At that moment, there were no hugs or apologies explicit, but the box was left on the table, and inside there were all his papers, the deed, the pension, even his car title. He looked at her calmly and just said, "Thank you for giving me back what I should have lose." After that visit, something changed in Esteban too. He didn't say it, but started calling her further followed, to spend every so often with a supermarket bag or ask him, needed something. It wasn't guilt, it was something else thing. An attempt at reconnection from clumsiness. Teresa did not reject him, but nor did it make it easy for him. There was learned that the affection is not begged for, and that the bonds are nurtured with actions, not just words. Mariana, in change, continued distant. He commanded messages sporadic, but she didn't dare to return home. Camilla, in silence, mediated. He carried news from one to the other, building an invisible bridge between 3 generations marked by wounds different. Teresa, meanwhile, clung to her new routine as who water a sprout, with patience, without haste, trusting in which it was planted sooner or later would flourish. The group of women in the square also grew. What began as a chat between neighbors became in a small listening and learning circle. Every Friday, they arrived further ladies with folders, envelopes, and even witnesses. A lawyer-retired woman from the neighborhood began to attend, offering his aid free. They called her Dr. Charo, and with her they learned to read contracts, understand the letters small. Who knows what they shouldn't sign, never without consulting. Teresa, without wanting to, became in reference. It did not give advice, but shared his experience. Read, even if your hand shakes. Read, he repeated. His phrase began to circulate in little pieces of paper, handwritten by women they kept in the wallet. They no longer felt invisible. They were no longer alone. And in the middle of those meetings began to emerge new stories, new resistances. A woman called Rosario told through tears that she had recovered his house after discover that your son had her sold with a signature counterfeit. Another one, which had required his pension complete after years of its daughter-in-law, will manage it. Teresa listened with the heart open, moved by the force of those women who, like she, had been educated to yield, to serve, not to question. In one of those meetings, Camilla took a camera borrowed and recorded the testimonies. He said he wanted to make a short documentary for school. Teresa felt uncomfortable at first, but accepted. I want others' girls, as I listen, our stories before it is late. He explained his granddaughter. The recording. It was simple, intimate. There was no script, only true voices, tired eyes but bright, wrinkled hands that held papers as ye were flags. When Teresa saw herself on the cell phone screen, by first once it was seen complete, not as a mother, not as widow, and as a woman, the documentary that Camilla edited. It was brief, barely 10 minutes, but loaded with truth. He presented it at school and then shared it on social media. To everyone's surprise, it began to circulate quickly. Women from other neighborhoods, from other provinces even, they began to leave comments. That's me. My mother also signed without knowing. Thanks for talk about this. In just a few days, the video surpassed 5,000 views. Teresa, who didn't fully understand as that digital world worked, all she could say was, so many people saw it. Camilla hugged her and replied, and more will see it, Grandma, because what you did, it matters. Teresa wasn't interested in fame, but yeah, I felt that something was there changed. It was no longer just a family history. His gesture had become turned seed for many others that were beginning to wake up. One Saturday, during the neighborhood fair, a woman approached timidly. Are you the one? In the video? She asked. Teresa nodded, somewhat uncomfortable. The woman, her eyes filled with tears, took her hand. Thank you. I didn't sign because of you. They were going to throw me out. Everything. Teresa didn't know that say. He just returned it. He squeezed and nodded. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat down in his armchair favorite, the same as there was upholstered with his own hands 20 years, and thought in everything that was changed from that drop in the bathroom. If it hadn't been beaten, if I hadn't read, if I hadn't written that line, so many things that might not have passed, but they passed. Because something inside her, call it intuition, dignity, or simple tiredness, had turned on, and that something had her brought there, sitting in his house with the walls painted, the jasmine blooming, and a granddaughter who looked at her with pride. As they passed by the months, Teresa began to write with more frequency, not only in his black notebook, but also in loose sheets, in napkins, in margins of books. He wrote thoughts, memories, phrases loose that came to his head while cooked or swept the patio. Camilla began to clean up those papers and the kept in a box with the label, Grandma's voice. One day he proposed to her make a little book with everything that, to print it at the end of year fair, he said excited. Teresa laughed. Who will want to read what I think? Camilla responded firmly. I want, and if I want, others will want too. That statement, simple, said with conviction teenager, it moved her more than any tribute. It was the first time I felt that his voice was not background noise, but a melody that someone wanted to hear. The fair arrived, and the booklet, titled Section C and Others Truths, was sold out in an hour. It was barely 20 copies, bound with thread and cardboard covers hand, painted by Camilla. But each person who bought it did so with care, like carries something fragile. A woman brought it to Teresa to have it signed. Another asked to be taken out a photo with her, in the square where she used to sit and knit. In silence, now formed a row in front of her table. Teresa didn't quite know how to behave. He just smiled, thanked, and offered herbal tea to those who stayed a while more. Inside, there was no vanity, but a mixture of gratitude and wonder. Never imagined that height of life, when many they believe that already all this said, she would be starting to say his piece, and that someone, on the other side, would be listening. One day, Mariana returned, unannounced, without messages. Previous, only appeared on the sidewalk, with the face less haughty, with a slower pace. Teresa was watering the plants in the yard when he saw her. There were no hugs or reproaches, just one look long, full of years, of words that were never said. Mariana entered as if it were the first time. He sat down in the kitchen, in the same chair as always. I saw the video, she said finally. I read he book. Teresa stayed still. Mariana took out of her briefcase a printed sheet, underlined with a marker. This fragment, you wrote it, you right? It was a phrase from the black notebook. Sometimes those who are most we love are the ones we love the most, us. They are silent. Mariana swallowed. I'm sorry, Mom, not for what I did, for what I didn't see. That confession, simple and belated, was enough. Teresa didn't cry. She just put one on him cup of tea ahead. Take it, that's still, it's hot. They spoke little, but they spoke. Mariana did not come to justify nor to seek absolution. He came to see, to understand, a listen. He left further light, and Teresa more in peace. That night, he wrote in his notebook, today. He saw me, finally. The visits began to be sporadic but sincere. Mariana brought biscuits, washed the dishes without anyone asking him to. Sometimes he stayed in silence, observing he gardened. Camilla, seeing her, smiled. She knew something was happening, repairing, even if it did not take name. Teresa no longer expected that everything back to how it was before. What he wanted was simple. Truth. That was enough. There was learned that it's not about winning, but about not losing one. Same in he I try. And that teaching, although silent, it was extending like the roots of jasmine in your patio. Firm, deep, inevitable. As time went by, Teresa stopped measuring her days based on what their children did. I no longer expected calls, nor did he feel guilty about the silences. I had his rhythm, their encounters in the square, his notebook and his plants. He learned to say no without trembling, to say yes without guilt, and to say not now, without feeling selfish. Every time a neighbor asked him help with a paper or tell him a history of abuse disguised as love, he listened with respect, without giving chair. I only shared his experience. Sometimes just one was enough, his phrase, so that the other woman straightens up in the chair, like if something inside were to fit. It was not power that Teresa had discovered, it was dignity, and that dignity, woven in years of silence, now it became in voice, a voice firm, low, but impossible to ignore. Camilla, by his part, continued documenting everything, every sentence, every I meet, every story of those women, older people, was remaining registered in her new project, a blog called Women Who Write, his Section C. She shared it with her schoolmates, with teachers, even with strangers, She received messages from daughters who wanted to understand their mothers, of granddaughters who were beginning to listen with others' ears. The blog did not go viral, but, yes, vital. It was a space of memory and reparation. Teresa, who barely used her cell phone for calls, learned to navigate with Camilla's help. He read the comments, he would get excited, and sometimes left a simple answer: "Thank you for read us. You can also write he, his." That phrase, so simple, became a motto, because if there was something learned, Teresa, was that no one can sign you history by you, not even your children, and that writing, even if it's just a single line, can change it all. One morning, while cleaned his shelf highest in the closet, Teresa found an old letter from Julian, his husband. It was yellowed, stored between a photo album and a recipe handwritten. He sat down to read it with the glasses crooked on the tip of his nose. In the letter, Julian thanked him to have it accompanied in the years further hard, by his patience, please his silence, by his strength. She said she hoped that one day she too could think. In same, not only in the others, Teresa felt that this paper was an echo of what she now lived, as if his lifelong companion had left sown a gentle warning, a caress written in advance. He kept the letter next to the black notebook, like two witnesses of the same process, that of a woman who learned to taking care of others. But in the end, he also learned to take care of yourself. That same 1 week, received an invitation from the neighborhood cultural center. They wanted to chat about the rights of older persons and asked him to share his history. At first he hesitated. What could say she that they had not saying already? But Camilla encouraged her. "Grandma, it's not about what you know, it's about what you've lived through." On the day of the talk, Teresa put on her blouse white favorite and a stone necklace that made years did not use. He spoke slowly, in short, unadorned sentences. He told about the fall, about the paper, about the gloss. He told, as there was sense that his life was about to disappear without doing anything noise, and how that line handwritten he rescued her. When he finished, there was applause sincere. But what moved her most was a lady who, with tears in eyes, approached him and said, "Thank you. Now I know that still I can say no." After the talk, Teresa returned home with a sensation new. It was not joy nor pride. It was relief, as if finally it would have been removed. A weight that was carried from toward decades, without knowing it. He poured himself some tea, sat down in the patio next to the jasmine, which already was beginning to sprout with force, and wrote, "Today they listened to me without asking me permission. Today I spoke without asking sorry." He closed a notebook gently. I didn't need more words that night. Just contemplate that silence different, the one that no longer hurt, the one that seemed like a hug. In the following days, several women of the neighborhood began to approach to ask him advice or just to thank her. She didn't act important. She responded with the same naturalness with which always there was offered a plate of food or a clean blanket. What changed was that now his help also came with a condition. But first, read everything before signing. In one of those visits, arrived a young man with his elderly mother. The lady didn't speak much. She seemed sad, withdrawn. Teresa offered her tea, and the three of them sat down. After a while, the older woman began to tell that her son wanted me to sign some papers by year. Something was happening. Teresa didn't give her opinion. She just asked him see the documents, reviewed each sheet calmly and pointed out the important things. "This paper says that you would no longer have the right to decide about your house. Are you sure that's what you want?" The woman, he shook his head, almost in whisper. The young woman, her daughter, and hugged her. "Mom, I didn't know it was so. Thank you, Teresa." It was at that moment that Teresa understood that her history was not only a limit, but also a tool, that your Section C not only had it brand to she, but continued protecting many others, one conversation at a time. One day Camilla asked him, "Yeah, some time thought in leave the house." Teresa looked at her surprised. Leave. Why? Camilla replied, I don't know. For everything that happened. For what? You did. Teresa smiled tenderly. This house isn't just walls, my love. It's history. It's where I cried, I laughed, I raised, I fell, and I got up. I don't stay by custom. I stay because it belongs to me. That answer was left floating in the air, like a statement without the need for a signature. Because what Teresa had learned with the time was that belonging is not just legal or material. It's emotional. It's knowing that that place, that patio with jasmines, and that kitchen with the smell of toasted bread carries his brand. And although his children would have darling delete her, there was written something they couldn't revoke. Your memory. If this part moved you, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to keep telling stories, real like this. That same 1 month, received by mail, an envelope unexpected. It was from a small publishing house that had read his little book at the fair and wanted him publish it officially. Camilla screamed with excitement, but Teresa just laughed. Publish what? If barely I know how to use the computer. Camilla replied that she didn't. We need to know everything. Just be encouraged. With the help of your granddaughter and lawyer Charo, reviewed the rights, signed a contract fair, and the book was edited under the name The Teresa Clause. It was distributed in libraries popular, centers community, and book fairs neighborhoods. Teresa never quite got used to being called writer, but understood that there was something powerful in leave a footprint, not by recognition, but by prevention. Because each line written was a reminder, no one has the right to decide by you, nor not even T they call mom. With the passing of the years, the impact of its history followed, growing in silence, like a root that goes through hard earth until it finds light. Some schools, they began to use their case as example in citizenship classes. She was mentioned on a local radio program as a woman who transformed a legal clause in an act of dignity. Collective. Teresa did not change his routine by that. It continued going downtown community, writing in his notebook, taking tea with the neighbors. But something in his walking was different. He no longer walked with his eyes downcast. He no longer apologized. By occupy space. If someone asked him talk about what there was lived, she did it with the serenity of someone. No longer fears being judged, because I understood that the most brave, there was no been right that line, but dare to read when all they expected me to sign without looking. Did you stay here? Then help us continue. Subscribe to the channel now. Same. Only like this, we will be able to continue creating more stories that deserve to be told. Camilla, now in his last year of high school, preparing his final thesis on invisible voices, the resistance, silent women, older people. The central figure by, of course, it was Teresa. It included interviews, quotes from the notebook, photos of the group from the square. One day he asked her if it bothered him that I told all that. Teresa shook her head, smile. If it will help you to someone, tell it everything. And so she did. In the final presentation, in front of her teachers and classmates, Camilla read a fragment of Julian's letter and then one from her grandmother's notebook. When she finished, there was a long, warm applause. Some, they were crying, not out of sadness but by recognition. Teresa was not there present, but Camilla brought her a video. Look, Grandma, everything this was born from that line yours. Teresa looked at him without saying a word, but in the end, with shining eyes, she murmured, then it was worth it. One morning, Teresa woke up further earlier than usual. It felt light, in peace. Prepared your coffee with bread from the day before, like always, and sat down in the courtyard. He observed his jasmine, now full of white flowers, like a burst of living memory. He took out his black notebook, wrote a single line and closed it. Then he went to his room, opened the drawer where kept the papers important, and placed inside Julian's letter, the publishing contract, the first little book bound by Camilla, and a handwritten note. What we signed can take us away things. What we write, never. He closed the drawer calmly. It wasn't a farewell nor a preparation for the end. It was an act of order, as his history finally had a place defined, because there was learned that even the invisible needs to be filed, cared for, safeguarded. That day he received a visit unexpected, a young man with a baby in arms. She told him that she was a friend of a friend, that she had read his book, and what I needed talk. Teresa invited her in. In the kitchen, the young woman explained that his mother was by sign a power of attorney that would leave her with nothing. She didn't know as tell her not to do it. How do you talk to a mother without making her feel attacked? He asked, almost crying. Teresa didn't give him an answer direct. He showed her his notebook, he read to her some phrases, and at the end he said, "It's not about convincing. It's about listening together. Take this, read it with her, and if once sign the same, let it be knowing." The young woman hugged Teresa before leaving. In that hug there was gratitude, but also a legacy passing from one generation to another, a legacy written, lived, shared, and Teresa understood that better than anyone. In the following months, Teresa began to delegate some things. Camilla became in a kind of family archivist, organizing everything that her grandmother had written, recorded, or taught. The neighbors of the group in the square took further leading role, guiding new women who arrived each week. Teresa continued present, but I no longer needed lead, just observe. His presence, it was enough. A gesture yours, one look, were enough to mark he way. One day they asked him, did not give it to him, fear stop being. Teresa replied, I don't care stop being, I care have state, and that there was done, be, in each paper read in time, in each signature detained by a doubt, in each daughter who chose, ask before obeying. Teresa had planted something that no longer depended on her, and that, whether she knew it or not, was transcending. One Sunday, while they drank mate with biscuits homemade, Camilla asked him that would do, could return back. Teresa looked at her tenderly and said, nothing. Everything I lived through, even what hurt, brought me here. Camilla looked down, moved. So, you don't feel, do you regret anything? Teresa thought for a moment, just not having heard before. That phrase was left recorded in the air, like a, it's true that I didn't need it explanation. Because in that house, where they used to sign unread things and they were accepted silences for love, now it was read in voice tall. It was written with intention, it was spoken without fear. Jasmine continued blooming, and the black notebook, although already spent, continued being a beacon. And Teresa, without intending to, had converted in that same a beacon, not to guide, but to remind that there is always a way to turn on the light from inside. The day he turned 80 years, Teresa didn't want a party. She only asked a table in the patio, hot tea and bread and butter. Camilla hung up photos on a thread between the jasmines, one from Julian, another from Mariana when she was a child, another from the group of women in the square, and several of Teresa writing in his notebook. Esteban brought a cake, Mariana arrived with flowers, and Camilla with an envelope. Inside, there was the first copy bound professionally from the Teresa clause. Teresa held it with both hands, like if it were a newborn born. He said nothing. He just stroked the lid and smiled. Thank you, he murmured. That afternoon there was no speeches, neither surprises, but yes, something a lot further valuable. The feeling of having arrived at a place built with effort own, if there is resisted without screaming, if there were written his history when everyone gave it to her by, completed. When the afternoon went away, turning off, and the last guest said goodbye, Teresa was left alone for a moment in the patio. The jasmine, bathed by the golden light of the sunset, he released its unmistakable aroma. He approached, cut a flower, placed it inside the black notebook and wrote his last entry of the day. The house continues being mine, not by the papers, but by everything it contains. He closed a notebook, hugged it by some seconds and saved it in his usual placé, next to Julian's letter. I wasn't looking for tributes. Only the silence, calm of someone who knows he has not betrayed himself. Because this time, yes, he signed, but he also wrote. And what he wrote, he changed. All, if this story touched you, dear, do something for us. Comment, share, but most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Our continued success depends on it. Thank you for being here.